they collect from our Facebooks or telephone conversations, etc., are given to some computer, and then some so-called very intelligent person with high IQ from MIT or Cornell or whatever is hired to decipher them. That is the pathological problem. Because the problem that we face is the absence of public intelligence. The reason that you have all these conspiratorial theories in the United States about the assassination of John F. Kennedy or the events of 9/11, because you either have the official account or conspiratorial theories. You don't have a critical space in between that begins to ask questions about the official stories in a manner that is publicly articulated and generated through public intelligence. Now, that's the first point. The second point I want to make is that this regime of knowledge production and visuality is the self-portrait also, following the argument of these two sides of the camera, of a self-defeating apparatus of power that has no innate legitimacy except by manufacturing an enemy for itself. Classical coalition mode of generation of political virtues. Okay? Because there is no innate legitimacy. And here I follow a very prominent German sociologist, Max Weber, who defined authority of any sort, charismatic, rational, legal, or traditional, predicated on two pillars, what he called inner justification and external means in politics as a vocation. Major essay that you should all read if you haven't already. Inner justification is that you believe that this power is legitimate. External means is that if you don't do it, you will be punished. The example I always give is a traffic light. When you are standing behind your car and the light is red, 3 o'clock in the morning, your car is coming. You feel like a fool just looking at that thing. Inner justification is that this is good for traffic. If I cross, it will be accidents, etc. But external means is the police officer, present or potential. That will give you a ticket if you cross the thing. So the combination of inner justification, you can also extend it to the authority of a parent over their children. Be home by 11 or else. So you are home by 11 or you're grounded by virtue of inner justification. It's good for me, these are my parents, they know what's best for me. External means you'll be grounded, or your pocket money will be denied, or whatever punishment parents. So two pillars of inner justification and external means are operative across the board. This, I argue, in the increased securitization of the states are lacking that legitimacy. And thus, by manufacturing a common enemy, they sustain that legitimacy, or they feign that legitimacy. The third part of my argument is we need critically to diagnose, oppose this regime via alternative regimes. Okay? In other words, as soon as we come together and we say, okay, this is the semiotics of domination of this particular regime of visuality that we are witnessing. We're not at its mercy. We can just sit down and generate alternative semiotics by way of showing that this is not legitimate. And this is what I plan to do. If we could go back for 1 second. The first part of my argument begins with a magnificent book that my late colleague Edward Said did back in 1981, in which he did a classical critique of the way in print media, at the time in 1981, still internet was nothing near what it is today. So much of the critique of Edward Said in 1981 is still the print media. So it's a literally critical analysis and criticism of the way mass media generates ideas and sentiments that with which we understand the world. And despite the fact that the word "see," how we see the world, is in the title of Edward Said's book, his analysis was very much limited to print media. And as a result, because he came from a comparative literary perspective, the question of visuality, which is far more effective than verbality. And the way I recognize it is when my elder son was 6 and we were about to watch Pinocchio together. And there was a stack of videos that I was supposed to choose Pinocchio. So being illiterate, I was looking for Pinocchio. Before I could find it, he reached for it, 5-year-old boy. I said, here it is. Because he was not looking for P, he was looking for the nose. And the nose is far more paramount than the Pinocchio study. Now, my other reason for paying attention to visuality is that after the events of 9/11, I argue that in fact the nature of violence has changed. From Sorel to Fanon to Marx to Sartre, we have had theorization of violence. Violence at the service of revolutionary purposes, for the sake of revolutionary purposes. Perhaps for us the most significant of it appears in Wretched of the Earth in Franz Fanon. My argument about 9/11 is that what we witness in 9/11 is actually violence for spectacular purposes, violence for the element of visuality. As you saw the events of 9/11 has no purpose. In other words, if Osama bin Laden or any other figure is behind this violence, there is no project, there is no program, there is no revolutionary agenda, there is no polity, no economy, nothing. It's just violence for visual purposes. Then I argue that the manner in which, since the events of 9/11, the idea of the enemy, which if you were to do a taxonomy of former President Bush's speeches, the word the enemy appears more than any other single word. The enemy wants this, the enemy is doing that, the enemy. So the constitution of the enemy has been visually manufactured. So it's not just a question of ideology or Muslims, etc. There is certain taxonomy of visuality that is in fact borrowed from anti-Semitism, European anti-Semitism. So my argument is contemporary Islamophobia is simply a regurgitation of classical European anti-Semitism. Big nose, sort of beard and grotesque faces. That's what it is that is being recycled for these purposes. Now, here, if we look at this particular configuration, you will see a central function for close-ups. By and large, most of these pictures are taken very close-up, and is the nature of the camera that by tight framing, okay, and grotesque angles, anybody looking at this gets scared. I get scared. And here I remind you of a magnificent text I hope you will read by 11th century Persian scientist Al-Biruni, who with Ghazali, a ruling monarch, went for the conquest of India in 11th century and wrote a book about India. The first 2 pages of Al-Biruni on India is, you may wonder, why am I writing a book about India? And then he says, well, number one, we don't know anything about India. We so much don't know anything about India that when we want to scare our children, we show them a picture of an Indian. Then he says, well, you will be surprised to know that Indians don't know anything about us either. So much so that when Indians want to scare their children, they show a picture of us. Which to me, this balance is far superior than any anthropological methodology I am aware of. From which 2 premises, then he concludes, perhaps there is something in our human faculty that we cannot understand except through binaries. Thus, my purpose is to teach you, apropos the question of tight framing and grotesque angles. The other factor is the question of cropping of the context. And the cropping of the context by zooming on certain events, such as burning of an American flag, is not just the events that this could be only 10 people. I mean, from the excitement that is in this picture, this could be a massive demonstration of tens of thousands of people. But if you open your angle just I don't know, a few degrees, you'll probably see there are only 10 people sitting there. I mean, it's a very ordinary technique. This cropping of the context is not just visual, it's also what actually caused this anger. What is framing this anger? Now, the last thing I'm going to show is an infamous ad that notorious Islamophobe in the United States recently put together. In any battle between civilized man and the savage, support the civilized man. This ad was support Israel, defeat jihad. This ad was on buses going throughout New York and Chicago and so forth, and in subways and so forth. Now, here are my initial conclusions. That we need to work towards a semiotics of overcoming. The first question we ask, where to plant the camera? Who planted the camera? In classical American Western movies, the camera is usually on the shoulder of John Wayne. That's where the emotive universe of the camera is. So if the so-called Indian Native Americans are farther from the camera, and the camera effectively on the shoulder of John Wayne when John Wayne shoots, your emotive universe is with John Wayne. So where is the camera? The first question that you ask. The second is, who is shooting this particular shot? What are his or her particular qualifications? What angle? Okay? I'm sure you have seen, or you should see, the masterpiece of Kurosawa, Rashomon. That you see, depending on whose perspective you see, you have radically different readings of the event. The next issue, for what purpose is this picture taken? Is it for entertainment? Is it, for example, the famous snapshots of Abu Ghraib? They were not meant for publication. They were meant to be shared by members of the family. Look what I'm doing in Iraq. And then suddenly they assume a whole different purpose. And if we're talking about Muslims, of course the question is, can Muslims photograph themselves? And here is when I change the angle, and I want to invite you to look at a different regime of visual production at moments of revolutionary social uprisings that Iranians, Arabs, Muslims, Indians, Turks, Pakistanis, whoever, they are behind the camera. They are going through a traumatic moment in their history and they're recording it. Here is an example from the Green Movement in Iran in 2009 and what I call the rise of a new visual registry. Okay? That is no longer subject to that regime, generates its own regime. Okay? Now, try to put together the massive participation of Iranian Muslim women in these social uprisings, in their hundreds of thousands, in their millions, and how does that gel with the image of a passive Muslim woman who is sitting at home waiting to be liberated by American military? Here is a new conception of masculinity. Mousavi being embraced, the symbolic leader of the Green Movement in Iran, being embraced by his people and so forth. And here I want to show you a clip of his presidential campaign, Mousavi's presidential campaign. Moussa, if you could help me with this, I'm completely technophobic.
نزدیک غروب آفتاب است و من صبح را دوست دارم.
سر اومد زمستون شکفته بهارون گل سرخ خورشید باز اومد و شب شد گریزون گل سرخ خورشید باز اومد و شب شد گریزون کوها لاله زارن لاله ها بیدارن تو کوها دارن گل 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 آفتابو میکارن تو کوها دارن گل 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 آفتابو میکارن توی کوهستون دلش بیداره تفنگ و گل و گندم داره میاره توی سینش جان 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 توی سینش جان 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 یه جنگل ستاره داره جان جان یه جنگل ستاره داره یه جنگل ستاره داره جان جان یه جنگل ستاره داره
دولت بعدی دولت عقلانیت، دولت استفاده از کارشناسان، دولت استفاده از نهادهایی خواهد بود که این ملت با پایمردی خودشون اونها رو پایگذاری کردن، نه اینکه یه دولت رمالی و کفبینی باشه.
لبش خنده نور دلش شعله شور صداش چشمه و یادش آهوی جنگل دور صداش چشمه و یادش آهوی جنگل دور کوها لاله زارن لاله ها بیدارن کوها دارن گل 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 آفتابو میکارن تو کوها دارن گل 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 آفتابو میکارن توی کوهستون دلش بیداره تفنگ و گل و گندم داره میاره توی سینش جان 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 توی سینش جان 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 یه جنگل ستاره داره جان جان یه جنگل ستاره داره یه جنگل ستاره داره جان جان یه جنگل ستاره داره.
امیدوارم که این سلحشوری ها در خردادها و خردادها و خردادها تکرار شود.
Woman who would be arrested in the streets of Paris for looking like she does, would be harassed in London or Munich or whatever, are actually leading the revolution. Here, in countries from Libya to Algeria to Bahrain, Egypt, Tunisia, etc., you have a wave of revolutionary uprisings. Here is a scene from the famous Tahrir Square that became a liberated square and became so famous and prototypical that actually many squares began to name it themselves after Tahrir Square. And my point is that from this point on, under revolutionary circumstances, social traumas, Arabs, Muslims, they begin to take charge of their own images. The internet in particular becomes flooded with these new signs that systematically and categorically challenge the images that are produced otherwise. Muslim women are integral to these revolutions and in various forms depending on their class or city that they come from. The Quran, which is burned in the United States by some pastor, is now subject to new understanding, a new sort of lending itself to what it means in future. Here is Tawakkul Karaman, Nobel laureate and revolutionary leader of the Yemen. I encourage you to see videos of her when she is actually leading the revolution in Yemen. And again, from Morocco to Yemen to Bahrain to the earliest stages of the Syrian revolution, which was entirely non-violent. And if you wish, at the end I can talk about the later militarization of the resistance, but is of a different sort. And the two key terms of liberty and freedom begin to play a role, and freedom from tyranny, as Hannah Arendt talks about in her book on revolution, and liberty to participate in public space. The leading slogan of the Arab Revolution, people demand the overthrow of the regime, I have always argued, is not just the political regime that is being demanded to be overthrown. It is also the regime of knowledge, the way we have understood these societies, and also by extension the visual regime. And I also want to share with you another clip that hopefully will work, which is a rap by an Egyptian rapper.
النصر
آن الأوان نحرر بلادنا ونحل مشاكلنا ونرجع الكرامة لشعبنا.
We can help our country to be better.
Moving on, what we are witnessing in these moments of transition is what in my book on the Arab Spring are called liberation geography. One way of beginning to dismantle the supposition that we are at the receiving end, at the mercy of the regime of visuality that is targeted to us from anywhere, is to begin to reconfigure our conception of the world. Okay, and recenter it. One of the key passages in this lyric was the mother of the world. If the revolution is happening in Egypt, then Egypt is the mother of the world. If it's in Iran, it's Iran. If it's Turkey, it's Turkey. If it's Mexico, it's Mexico. Now, I want to, I'm now winding down towards the conclusion, not to try your patience. I want to take you back to 1950s and 1960s, long before these revolutions. And a magnificent constellation of revolutionary posters produced by people your age, your generation, in their late teens, in their 20s, and in their 30s. They were Iranian students studying in Europe, in the United States, in Latin America, in Asia, anywhere. And they were committed to a revolution in their homeland. However, wherever they were, they wed that revolutionary cause to the social justice in that country. This is a typical example of a poster done by my own good friend Migzal Najumi by Iranian students in New York in solidarity with the civil rights movement in the United States. But this is not at the expense of forgetting about other revolutionary sites, in this case the question of minorities, the Kurds in western part of Iran, by the same artist. You see that their revolution is rooted in revolutionary semiology around the globe, wherever they come, Mao, Lenin, Zapata, etc., anywhere. These are all in 50s and 60s, and it is critical. A constellation of 146 of these posters have been miraculously preserved in, of all places, Asheville, North Carolina. I was just there a week ago. We curated these posters, and I wrote a short book on them, precisely by way of not just detecting the archive, but changing the archive into allegories of other revolutionary uprisings. And you see that already the figure of a veiled Muslim woman is part of their revolutionary agenda. It's not alien to them, but it is part of a wider visuality. Anti-imperialist aspects, deeply rooted in commitment to the labor class, workers of the world unite. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Homage to Guernica, May Day, revolutionary cosmopolitanism. There's even a Spanish down there. If you see English, Arabic, Spanish. And if, this is my last point, if those fantastic